fruits. Today is probably the first time since I started shooting these live entries that it's warm and sunny outside, and it's because spring is finally here. And I don't know about you, but this weather always fills me with a lot of energy and enthusiasm. And although today's diorama is not exactly gonna be spring themed, actually not at all, it's gonna be pretty fresh because it takes place in the Pacific. So yeah, let's build some palm trees. Because this time I wanted an oval base, I started by drawing and cutting the shape out of a piece of cardboard. I prefer using the original box lid from the kit as a small Easter egg. It's nice when a part of the kit will live on inside the diorama. But this cardboard cutout only serves as a bottom layer for the scene and as a cutting template. You see, when you glue it to a block of styrofoam, you can then trace the shape on a hot wire cutter. The wire is hot enough to cut through styrofoam, but not enough to damage the cardboard. The resulting cut is not always smooth, but it's not an issue because we'll cover it up with wooden veneer. After cutting the base to a reasonable height, I proceeded with the basic terrain volumes and shapes. I used to struggle with this task when the only suitable tool I had was a hobby knife or a kitchen knife, but since I bought this handheld hot wire, my experience has drastically changed. Not every feature has to be carved out of that single block of foam, and that's why keeping the offcuts at hand can be very useful. This step triggers my trypophobia in the worst way possible, but it's essential if we want to have a better time while sculpting the terrain. You see, there are multiple clays and other concoctions that can be used to sculpt the groundwork, but my favorite has been the VMS Smart Mud 2.0, and recently, Modeler's World sent me their clay for testing. Well, I'm already familiar with Smart Mud, so I'm using it under the tank, and this is where the numerous holes in the styrofoam come in handy, because otherwise the clay just would have a very hard time sticking to the smooth surface. You can press it down a lot using very little force, so it's perfect for embossing the tank into the ground. And if the lower track is still somewhat levitating in a few places, the easiest solution is to simply press the clay against it. That low stickiness, which makes it tricky to apply, is also its greatest strength because it won't stick to your model. It should come as no surprise that making ruts using leftover tracks is also easy. I just like to leave the clay for a while so it can start solidifying, and only then I start making these imprints. Otherwise, it's easy to tear it off, which leads to more unnecessary work. The remaining sections were ideal for testing the new clay. This one is much more similar to the traditional air drying clay, but it's softer and more flexible. It kind of feels like old chewing gum if I'm honest. However, it adheres to the foam really well and it's easy to sculpt it with a silicone brush or other tools. Okay, with the basic volumes established, we can take care of the sides of this scene. With oval or circular bases, it's crucial and really the best way to cover the sides with a single length of veneer because the outward tension is so strong that multiple pieces of wood might just not hold in place. I've only made a very rough cut beforehand because I like to adapt the edges to the ground precisely once the veneer is in place. With the sides trimmed and sanded, I can now easily fill and cover up the edges with more of that modeling clay. This way we can achieve a perfect, discrete border of the diorama. Of course, the joint needs to be filled, but in my limited experience, it's pretty much impossible to fully conceal it, so I like to put it on the backside, somewhere out of sight. Because I'm using oak veneer, the wood putty also has an oak color. It works surprisingly well once it's varnished with wood stain. Alright, that's a pretty decent starting point, don't you think? These are also the most boring steps in the whole process for me, so let's now focus on some fun stuff. For example, adding realistic ground texture. I wanted to have two distinct types of groundwork. The first one is rather subtle, which I created from two types of diorama textures from VMS. I was actually helping to develop these, so if you're interested in such high-fidelity diorama products, you can grab them through the links in the video description, and you'll even get a discount with my sales coupons. These textures are very handy because I can fine-tune the intensity of the ground scatter, and for a compacted road, be it the one on the side of the diorama, or this which has been created in the jungle by the constant traffic of military vehicles, a finer texture is more suitable. For the untouched parts of the jungle, I wanted something grittier and more voluminous. I was recently replanting my plants into bigger pots, so I had a whole bag of gardening substrate lying around in my mother room. Turns out it's the perfect texture for forested areas because of all the roots, small leaves and broken sticks. I can see this substrate working perfectly for a World War I diorama as well. So that's the texture out of the way, and so far we're looking pretty good, even with the tank in place. Or are we really? Something wasn't sitting well with me the whole time, and turns out it was the hill behind the tank which was too small, and the piece of jungle in the foreground that was too large and empty. So, you know what? I made a completely new scene using the very same methods and materials, but this time I had to make it rectangular because I didn't have enough veneer for another oval base. I made the hill taller and also included a bunch of broken palm tree trunks, which we'll discuss in a moment. But first, let's add some basic vegetation. I did a fair bit of traveling across Saipan on Google Street View, especially on the slopes of Mount Tapucho, where this diorama is situated, and at a certain elevation, your traditional jungle transitions into lots of tall grass, shrubs, and trees that are not palm trees. I'm no expert, okay? Basically, I didn't want to create something that feels completely out of place for this island, but I wasn't going to replicate the thick foliage either, because then we'd be barely able to see the tank in the diorama. So the majority of the job was once again carried out with static grass and a cheap applicator from eBay, but what I started to notice quite often in nature is that a good portion of the low vegetation isn't plain grass, but instead small weeds. This is my first attempt, so it's not perfect, but I tried sprinkling a bit of Woodland Scenics fine turf on top of some of these tufts to simulate that effect. We'll see how it looks with some paint on top. I also bought a bunch of dried plants from Petting House, and this pepper grass is really cool, although very fragile. I can imagine creating dense shrubs from it, but for now I just placed it in a few random places. There were a ton of fallen leaves in the package, so I added them to the edge of the road, something that's quite visible even in historical images. The other plant I bought is maidenhair fern, and although it looks nice in the package, once I started gluing it in place, it didn't really click well with me, so I kept it rather limited. Anyway, at this point, we're pretty much ready, but let's quickly talk about the wood stain, where I decided to switch from a stiff disposable paintbrush to a kitchen sponge, which allows for a much smoother application, and it pretty much leaves no brush marks and lets the wood grain to be more visible. Okay, let's now see how I made the palm trees. I haven't done them before, so maybe it's not the best approach, but I found that leftover spruce are ideal for the trunks. They're straight and can be slightly bent, just like real palms. The smooth plastic surface wouldn't accept putty too well, so after sharpening the top end, I wrapped the whole thing in copper wire. Nothing crazy, just a nice coil that will provide a better grip. Magic Sculpt is the ideal putty for these kinds of jobs because it's very soft and takes a while to dry. Now, wrapping the sprue in putty is one thing, but unlike most trees, palms have a very regular trunk, so the putty coverage should be nice and even without any bulges or any other funny shapes. Rolling it on the workbench does a pretty good job, although the result won't be perfect. Adding the bark texture is actually very easy but time consuming. A wedge-shaped silicone brush is perfect for it, but unlike most trees, the texture doesn't run along the trunk but across. That's what makes the job really slow. Here it's essential to check your reference images because different types of palm trees have a very different bark texture. Once the trunk was dry, I sculpted the heart or the apical bud at the top. Here I went much heavier with the texture because it's a place where the trunk pretty much splits open, right, and new leaves grow out of it. While it was still soft, I pressed a few dry leaves into it. This is a small detail that I also observed in reference images, and it leads me to the main issue: what to use for the leaves. Well, there are many ways to make them, and my favorite ones being bird feathers and leaves from fake plants that you need to cut to the desired shape. But I decided to play it safe and bought these highly detailed photo-etched leaves from Aber. I always had a sort of negative connotation with photo-etched vegetation because, I mean, it's made from metal, right? That doesn't sound authentic at all. But as it turns out, brass vegetation is actually far more realistic than paper plants. You know, it's the amount of detail, accuracy, easy shaping and manipulation, and lastly, sturdiness. However, I found that the weight of each leaf was too much for the uncured putty, so inserting them into the soft apical bud wasn't the best solution. But I made it work with a bit of super glue. However, turns out one set is only enough for one tree, and I was making two of them. So I ordered two more sets just to be safe, and once they arrived, I drilled small holes into the dry putty and secured them with super glue. Much sturdier and, in fact, quicker. So there we go. I'd say it looks quite the part. It's important to keep the biggest leaves at the bottom and finish with the smallest ones at the top for that nice natural shape of the tree. And with that out of the way, we can start painting. First of all, I had to mask the wooden sides. This time I used regular painter's tape, which is made from paper, and it works good enough for the job. There's just no need to waste precious Tamiya tape. I'm not sure if I talked about it in my previous diorama video, but I had an idea that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to skip the dark priming stage, at least on the grass. But I got carried away in my haste and forgot about it, so I did it anyway. But hey, the priming stage is essential on other parts, be it the trunks from epoxy putty, or the photo-etched leaves, where I actually applied a coat of metal primer as well. The dark primer is quite essential because not only it provides a nice unified base coat for our paints, but also helps establish basic shadows. In the past, I used whatever green I had laying around for the basic grass colors, but recently I bought the basic flat green, and boy, it's such a great color for this. And when you light it up, it's even better. Be it with yellow-green, sky, buff, you name it, it's gonna look great. Next time I'll try the same approach, but without the dark primer, so we can compare the results and see which one is better, okay? As for the earth tones, this was pretty simple. I didn't even prime some of the sections because the earth textures were pretty dark already, and I just painted everything with buff, which is the same color I used on the tank. It gives me the same foundation for weathering as on the model, and it also tidies up all those green oversprays from the grass. So yeah, that's our airbrushed base coat ready for further refinements with paintbrushes. But you know what? Let's finish the palm trees first. Here it's actually gonna be a small recap of what we just done, but it's very pleasant to observe the metal leaves come to life under layers of paint. Also, the intensity of each highlight and different color mixtures can give us a nice subtle contrast between both trees. The basic gist of it is that the small leaves at the top receive the most sunlight, and as such should be pretty vivid. The ones at the bottom should be darker, but if we want to take it a step further, reference images often show that bottom leaves tend to dry out and fall to the ground, so why not simulate that as well? Painting the trunks is easier after the green tones are done, just like with the grass and earth tones. Palm trees on Saipan have a very grayish, almost white bark, so I chose a pale, desaturated base coat. I followed that immediately with a generous layer of dark wash, which will nicely bring out all those meticulously sculpted crevices. That almost white, irregular finish can be achieved in multiple ways, but I chose a sponge, which is definitely the fastest. The amount can vary on each tree, so it's another opportunity to add some variety between them. This was followed by another round of enamel washes, but this time I kept them more subtle, just to re-emphasize those recessed areas. Diluted brown acrylic paint was applied towards the bottom for a more natural gradient between the trunk and the groundwork. And last but not least, I did some additional brushwork on the leaves. The stalks have a distinctively lighter color, so I did that, and I also enhanced those dry leaves with several dust-colored acrylic washes. And just as I finished the trees with washes, let's start the groundwork with the very same technique. You see, my approach to groundwork is the same as on my models. This means starting with a light dusty base coat applied with an airbrush, followed by heavy washes using the same enamel effects as I used on the tank. This way the whole process becomes nicely streamlined, and it also ensures the weathering on the model will match the colors on the ground. But it's not just about that. We can also make the most out of that nice ground cover, adding contrast between dry and wet areas, emphasizing surface features such as track marks in the soil, or highlighting raised areas with a lighter dusty color. And because I very much like working with AK products, you can get them using an affiliate link in the video description as well as a sales coupon for a small discount. The broken trunks had their bark painted in the same way, and the fresh wood inside was picked out with skin colors. Yup, I found that skin tones actually work much better for fresh wood rather than sandy tones. While I was spraying the primer, I tried to avoid those nice leaves. I was going to pick them out later anyway, but I felt like a paintbrush wouldn't be the best approach. So I was pleasantly surprised that my new Fengda BD208 is precise enough to paint them almost one by one. At this point I could superglue the trees in place, because what's left to do are some minor details that are not yet a part of the diorama, especially the figures for the scene. I hinted that there would be figures, but they won't be exactly human figures. Mantis Miniatures actually has a set of Asian animals, but I wasn't able to find them online, and the next best thing was a set of African animals, which I just paint more accurately for Saipan. So, for example, I painted the lizard in grayish tones with yellow dots, to represent a baby monitor lizard. When I was looking for images for geographically accurate monkeys, I found tons of results, but some of them were misleading. The most helpful source of reference was a page about a small zoo located on Saipan, and I went with white fur on their bellies and inner sides of their legs, and a light orange-brown for the rest. I don't know the species, and something tells me that they should have tails as well, but again, don't take my word for it. I just tried to do my best with the limited resources I had at hand at the time. What I find very interesting about primates is how they have leathery, in many cases pinkish faces, which make them look quite human if you look closely. I mean, obviously, right? But it was interesting to grab a bunch of skin colors I normally use for human figures and use them on animals. And as you probably guessed, the only reason they're in the diorama is because the tank is nicknamed King Kong, and now I can call the whole scene monkey business. Finally, I just added a bunch of laser cut paper plants, which I've painted in a dark brown color. This is very useful because it makes them look more three-dimensional when the shadowed areas are painted in a dark color, so after gluing them to the base, I quickly picked them out with various green tones. These are small details, but they add a lot of fineness and authenticity to pretty much any scenic foliage. So I think that pretty much settles it. After this, the only thing was gluing the tank to the base with thick PVA glue, letting it sit for a while, and calling it A-OK. Well, my first date with a Pacific-themed diorama is over, and to be honest, I was here more for the tank than the actual scenery because USMC Shermans are some of the coolest looking tanks ever. But it was also a nice opportunity to try something new, such as the palm trees. It was also interesting, to say the least, to make a very nice oval base just to realize that it's just not working. Here I'd like to say that whenever I don't have a specific idea or composition in mind, I usually go with the flow and see what comes out of it. That's exactly what I did in this case, but it was the first time it didn't work at all. And I noticed it too late because I kept pushing forward. So that was pretty refreshing to say the least. But hey, as I said in the Sherman video, now I'm ready to tackle more unusual subjects and each one will have something fresh about it. And I already know which one will come first. It'll contain a lot of rust. Until then, I want to sincerely thank every single one of you for watching these videos, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be sitting here building models for a living, and I can't thank you enough for this amazing opportunity. All of this is also possible thanks to my incredible patrons. My whole Patreon page is like a Night Shift magazine subscription, as I post there pretty often, and you'll get updates from my workbench where I share my thoughts and insights. We can get in touch through DMs, comments, and emails. I'm posting 1 week early ad-free videos, and those stay there forever, so you can always get back to them. I also have some small extra goodies such as 3D models which you can use for detailing your projects, a bunch of real-life references for nature, old buildings and so on, and last but not least, these high-resolution studio photos which show the model in more detail than video ever could. It would help me a ton, but no pressure. Okay, my friends, to finish this off, I have to say that this project has taken much longer than I wanted because it was plagued by a bunch of problems that were happening outside my modeling studio, so to say, but that's just life. Right now, I feel like I'll be able to tackle the next one with more energy and enthusiasm. And you all stay safe, be nice to one another, build your models, don't just collect them, take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!